AFCEA TechNext Cyber session on Perimeter of the Future panel discussion. My name is Dennis Devera, and I am a computer engineer working for the Internet Protection Branch ID51. I will be your moderator for this assembly. First, let me introduce our distinguished panelists. From my furthest right, we have Dr. Robert Wetzel. He is the data scientist and technical executive who is in the forefront of driving digital data transformation within the government. His current role as the Chief Technical Advisor for the Fourth Estate Network Optimization and Defense Enclave Services is pivotal for designing and developing the future defense networking and enterprise services for the DoD. To his left is Mr. Devon Tyler. He is the Chief of the Internet Protection Branch, ID51, within the Cyber Development Directorate in DISA. In this capacity, he has oversight of a portfolio of cyber programs to include the Web Content Filter, Enterprise Break and Inspect, Filter List Management, and Distributed Denial of Service. Colonel John F. Misner IV is the Chief of the J34 Fusion Division, Joint Force Headquarters and Department of Defense Information Networks, JFH Odin, at Fort Meade. His division is responsible for identification, analysis, and mitigation of threats to the DoD Information Technology Enterprise. Mr. Ernest Hibbs is currently the Division Chief for Cyber Development Directorate, Engineering Division in DISA, which also involves the role as a Chief Engineer for the Cyber Development Directorate. His role provides an overall directorate-level coordination for cybersecurity capabilities by producing the Cyber Development Roadmap, integrated WBS, engineering processes, baseline reviews, and architecture capability modeling. To his left, Mr. Eric Chudal is the Cyber Technology Technical Advisor for the Cyber Development Directorate. He is on detail at DISA from the National Security Agency, NSA, to broaden his enterprise perspective and assist in cultivating cross-organizational collaboration. In this capacity, he facilitates improving the cybersecurity of the enterprise services at DISA, provides for the Departments of Defense, and thereby improves the cybersecurity of all DoD. And last but not the least, Mr. Duncan Carter is the Chief of the DMZ Protection Branch, also within Cyber Development Directorate. As ID52 Chief, he has oversight of the Enterprise Email Security Gateway, Zero-Day Network Defense Email, Domain Name Service, SIPRNet Releasable Demilitarized and SIPRNet Federal Demilitarized Zones, NIPRNet Federated Gateway, and the whitelist. So our next slide shows a list of talking points that will guide us in our panel discussion. Along this line, I kindly invite the audience to ask any questions during our talk, and we have a microphone available in the middle aisle. With that said, we will go to our first panel discussion point. The question is perimeter defense an obsolete way of defending the network? I would like to direct this question to Dr. Wetzel, please.
Can you hear me? Oh, yeah. How many of you folks have one of these in your hand right now? Yeah, everybody. So 25 years ago, when we designed the Department of Defense perimeter network, this wasn't a thing. No one envisioned that we would actually have a mobile workforce at the level we have now. So I think when it comes to the perimeter defense, it's going to have to change to meet those needs and those demands versus our our way of thinking now is that the perimeter's inside of a physical location. I'm sitting in the office. Everything out there is the bad people. Everything in here is the good people, right? So the new perimeter needs to be with anywhere, any place, any time, any government furnished device with any user. And so the way we think of it as I'm inside versus I'm outside, we have to change that whole thought process.
Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Hey, thanks for showing up as well. Being on perimeter, I'm probably a little biased here, but I'll say perimeter is alive and well. So the things that we're doing at perimeter, things like EBI, right, getting after threats that previously we had no visibility of, right, changing our mindset on how we do things. So again, perimeter is alive and well, but I agree with Dr. Wessel here. Our thinking has to evolve and change. The way that we do things, the way that we developed perimeter 25 years ago is not necessarily the mindset that we need to have today, right? But we're innovating, we're doing things differently, we're getting after the threat differently, right?
Colonel Misner?
Hey, sir.
100% agree. If you think about the traditional castle model, traditional cyber defense has always been that first line of defense. But now when we look at where the actual perimeter is, we have to be dynamic. We move it back and forth depending on the adversary. We create engagement zones. And now the perimeter is actually both inbound and outbound. And so we can catch it's the first line and the last lines of it. So yes, I agree that perimeter defense is live and well.
And Mr. Ernie Hibbs?
We're kind of microphone challenged here, so bear with us. So the perimeter, yes, it is alive, but the perimeter of the past, just like previously said by Devon, is tied to a physical structure. So if we take the mobile example and we think about what's the purpose of the perimeter? It's for protection. Take the mode example, it's for protection. So the perimeter of the future is going to be for whatever kind of device we have. I can't separate the perimeter of the future from cloud. I can't separate the perimeter of the future from zero trust, because whatever zero trust solution we come up with has to be kind of its own mini perimeter. So it's alive and well, and it's basically now a bunch of little mini perimeter children.
Mr. Chudal?
So I agree mostly with the other panelists, right? The perimeter is alive, will be around for quite a while, but it's dynamic and changing. As we have more of a mobile workforce, as we move to more cloud environments, the perimeter is going to have to adjust with that. But the logical perimeter, as opposed to the current physical perimeter, is going to have to be there with enterprise security capabilities for our enterprise services, whether that's for email, for DNS, for other things like that. We're going to have enterprise services to have awareness of what's going on there, detect threats, and take action against those. And in addition, as the perimeter is changing for the mobile environments, for example, we also have new capabilities as we're moving to the cloud, like with cloud browsing. Colonel Meisner mentioned the castle analogy. Cloud browsing gives us kind of a moat around the castle where we can push out the defenses a little bit further to contain things so that they can't even get to the castle walls. So as the perimeter is changing and adapting, there's new capabilities that can help the perimeter as well.
Good afternoon. My name is Duncan Carter. So I don't believe perimeter perimeter defense is completely obsolete in the way that we defend our networks. I know there's been discussion for at least the past 7 or 8 years stating that the perimeter is dead. Do we have to change? Yes, we do have to change and adapt, just like Dr. Wetzel had initially mentioned. But it's not something that you can just simply turn off, especially based on the large number of users that we protect at the perimeter and the large number of threats that we actually block. I still think there is a tremendous value to what perimeter defense provides to protection of the DODIN.
Thank you very much. The next question, what is DISA's role in providing this invaluable function or service? We would like to hear from our JFHQ DODIN representative, Colonel Meisner, please.
when we talk about perimeter defense, we talk about what are the functionalities, right? That's secure, operate, and defend the DODIN against all adversaries, right? That includes the traditional assets, externally facing. It's discriminating from good, from bad, from nefarious to mischievous to maybe just mistakes on the network. It's insider threat, right? So those kind of services, we need to make sure that we provide an outward-facing, consistent boundary across the entire network. That includes a battery of sensors so we can see and sense everything. That includes a cocktail of defensive capabilities that are interoperable, and then finally maneuver or responsive forces that are constantly hunting on the network that can catch those things that the sensors and our cocktail devices don't find.
Anybody else in the panel? Please.
So I'm going to piggyback on a couple of things you said. So it's great to have all these capabilities, but we need to make those capabilities transparent to the end user, and we need to automate those, because if we have a person in the middle of, wait, this is a bad thing, wait, no, that's a good thing, by the time we're able to protect and defend, it's too late. So we need to start looking at how to automate those repetitive tasks. We need to be able to do so in a way that the end user doesn't even know this is going on. So they're continuing to work as they normally do, and not realize there's a cyber event going on because it's mitigated automatically away from them. And I don't think we do a real good job at that today. It's very manual, very labor intensive. There's a lot of hours, man hours, to go through and to take an event, drill down into the event, determine, well, oh no, this was a mistake. Someone just misconfigured a route. It's right now, the way that we do it, it can take, hours to get to the root of a problem versus, if we automate this, the problems are aggregated away from the users itself.
I have one thing to add. So piggybacking off of Dr. Wessel, what is DISA role in providing this service and how do we add value? I do agree, is how do we automate, how do we make things faster for the end users, as well as just kind of getting back to the core capabilities that DISA offers, right? Providing these billions of blocks at the IEPs that really takes the load off of the subunits below perimeter, say JRSS or endpoint, right? As well as really getting after the threat so that we can solve operational issues, right? You don't want a Navy unit trying to resolve malware if we can stop it way above them and they can focus really on their true mission. All right, so I think that's one of the true core capabilities, really blocking that traffic as early as we can see it, and then allowing the people under us to really drive and do their mission, what they do well.
Okay. Anybody else in the panel? Yes.
Yeah, so I just want to jump in and just give a little perspective. So from our point of view, what the perimeter is basically it's that first line of defense between the internet and the NIPRNet. And just to give you an idea of some of the numbers, so we provide protection to enterprise services such as DNS, email, and web, like Devon had just mentioned. For DNS, so we block about 17 million threats that come per month for DNS, about 1 billion for email. And Devon mentioned for web, there's even more threats that come in through the web. And we also protect about 4.3 million DoD users. So that's just to give a little bit of perspective on, the value that perimeter brings to the DoD.
And I'd just like to piggyback a little bit on what Duncan and Devon and the others were saying, is that the perimeter has this, tier 1 visibility into all the things that are happening at the lower levels before it actually gets there or on the way out. And a big growth area I see, at least for DISA, in the future, is on the back end of that, not just in the devices at the perimeter, but on the cloud analytics, potentially machine learning. We're trying to develop that for making better insights into what's happening at the perimeter, how that affects downstream units, and what we can then do about that. And I think there's an enormous amount of growth we can have there.
This is Devon. I would add on one thing too. So we give a lot of numbers and metrics on how much we block. One of the things that we've been working on internally is the so what. right? There's billions of blocks. So what? What does that mean, right? And really, that means us defining who our customer base is, whether that be the analyst sitting in a SOC or the end user that has to get something to get their job done, right? What does that block mean to them? So one of the things we've been driving is really understanding what the metrics mean and really defining those for the end users and communicating those out to leadership.
So as we're discussing this, as a data scientist, to me, we're reducing the noise. We're reducing the amount of things that affect the network by stopping them, eliminate them early on. Now, we're not going to get everything as it first hits that first line defense, and that's why we always talk about defense in depth. But if you're going down through the tiers of how the DoD networks are set up, by the time you get to the base camp or post, we should have done a process of elimination of all this noise that is down to the essential things that the post, base, or camp need to be able to execute and have the resources they need, free from the and the things that we block. So I'm just going to call that noise from now on. I'm unanimous in that. Is it okay with you, Ernie, if I call it noise? I'm just checking.
Yes. So I'll add to this. If you think about the perimeter and what it provides, if you're getting rid of the noise and the benefit, if you had to take this on yourself because some bases have said, I want to connect directly to the internet, and you don't get the benefit of the filtering, the web content filtering, the iron port for your email, so you separate email from web traffic. If you want to take it on yourself, that's fine, but you're going to have to budget for all the extra hardware and all the extra processing. So I'm not saying it's free because it is part of the WCF, it's part of our baseline, but it's there to get rid of all the noise. Do you want to take that on yourself? Do you want to try to solve those problems, or can we solidify? When we go to the cloud with perimeter type capabilities, what's the big issue? Well, it sounds great. Let's do it right now because I can save on labor and I could do this and I could, yes, but the one thing, and everybody here has a family to some degree, right? So here you have controls versus freedom. So how much data can I see with the perimeter right now with the IAP? Everything. If we take it to a cloud solution, how much can I see on the government side? As much as that contract and that vendor and that supplier allows me to see, and it may only be incident-based. And I may only want to see incident-based. But right now we can see it all. And there's agreements that go in place, legal agreements with the general counsel. To be able to use the IP, you have to let us see your data for your good and for our good. So if you stand up something on your own, you may say, oh, well, I don't like the perimeter, I'm going to stand up on my own so I can see everything because I filtered some of my stuff out. You may not want to see everything. So I could go an analogy on that, but we don't want to. So it's a lot of work. It's there. Get in and use it because we're going to have to downsize it to some degree in the cloud. What kind of control do the service branches want to have over the data? Will they relinquish it to the cloud? That's kind of where we are.
Thank you, Mr. Ernie Hibbs. At this point, I would like to invite anybody in the audience to come forward if you have any questions, please. Thank you, sir. Please kindly state your name and the question.
Thanks for meeting and being here for all of us today. I really appreciate. My name is Sean Ray. I've been around you guys for a long, long time. We've been moving the boundary around for a long time. But what I know that we're coming up against the most is we're really good at that filtering on the inbound. Can we talk about what we're going to do about exfiltration controls on the boundary on the outbound?
Hey, so I'll take this. So I'm Devon Tyler from the Internet Protection Branch. So exfiltration, a lot of the problems when it comes to exfiltration is usually the traffic is encrypted, right? So we have an initiative called Enterprise Break-in Inspection, so we can actually see the secure traffic in an unsecure fashion, right? Actually evaluate and look at that traffic and make decisions based off of rules that we put in place. Does it look like exfil? If it does, can we block that session or should we monitor? So the things that we're doing to get after that mission, sir.
Right, and so DISA did upgrade policy a couple of years ago because we were always doing HSMs, that we wanted to see network HSMs everywhere by 2020, and that once we had network HSMs out there, we'd be able to load the certs for all of those known entities, web servers out there. But the crypto controls that we couldn't find keys to unlock, would we in the future say, if you don't share keys with us, we're not letting you out the gateway? That's part of that exfiltration.
I would say currently that's the way the technology is working.
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Afternoon, Lieutenant Colonel Charlie Haig, Cybercom J71 exercises. Based on what you said so far about the perimeter, how does that affect the end state and the vision of the joint regional security stacks and, to my understanding, their role in being the perimeter of the joint information environment?
Ernie, that should be you. Ernie's building the next.
A lot of truth there, a lot of close truth there. So in the JIE nodal topology architecture, JRSS is still in the mid-range. The IEP is owned by and managed by DISA. That's still the current guideline. So JRSS is, and now this is where I get to talk about JRSS because I'm really the Tiger team lead for the next gen. So JRSS meets a lot of capabilities as the first combined security solution on the street to try to answer everybody's need. What is it? It's a 45-pound Swiss Army knife. It does a lot, and it does more in some cases than most people want to do in one area. So as we look towards JRSS in the future, instead of having a Swiss Army knife, we need to have separate pieces of silverware. I've got malware detection that needs to supplement the endpoint solution. I've got cyber SA that needs to be focused on cyber SA. I have perimeter light capabilities for intrusion detection that need to be supplemental maybe at the base level for if I'm deploying a special ops unit and they're going to connect a certain way. So where are we going in the future with JRSS? Right now it's so big and doing so many things that it's hard to get the engineers and the system admins to know how to configure it and operate it. Does it replace what the perimeter is doing at that level, that volume? No, it wasn't meant to. But we have to think about JRSS as instead of the sweet single solution of tools that is at the JIE architecture level. The JIE architecture is everything that goes around the dot. The JRSS piece is for that base camp post station, and we need to figure out how we can make it more modularized. So if one service branch wants something that is a endpoint supplement, then that will grow. The endpoint is going to grow at one rate, the perimeter is going to grow at a different rate, and then cyber SAs. So these as separate components, as long as at the JRSS level, the out-of-band data shared, that's kind of where we need to go. Did I get you close?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Actually, I'm going to follow up a little bit on that too. And this, so these things were developed, IEP here, JRSS there, tool sets over here, and the programs are kind of siloed off. And so we're now looking at, okay, I got functionality on the IEP, but should this functionality be in JRSS, that tier? Or should some of these things in JRS tier be at the IEP? Or this CAP thing where we connect to the cloud access point and SCCAs? Are we doing the right things across the entirety of the ecosystem? So one of the things I'm doing in the Fourth Estate is kind of looking at this, because as we aggregate these agencies into this new DoD net, the future state, now I'm talking 2025, further away, that are we doing the things we should be doing in the right places? And so I'm going to Devon and say, hey, what about this? You guys are doing this here. How would this look here? And so we're actually doing some real engineering with folks and I'm standing up a lab to test just these things. So good idea when we started, but it kind of like got away from us a little bit. So I think to do a realignment with what Ernie's talking about the future, because he's the Tiger Team lead, and I'm going to lean on him in the fourth estate to design my JRSS next. Or what do you call it now? Do you have a name for it yet?
No.
Okay. Well, whatever Ernie calls it, that's what I'm leaning on for this next design, and not take it. This is what we have now. We need to change what we do to be more effective. Did that help out?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have another question, sir.
Hi, Andrew McNulty. Real quick question. Ernie mentioned all the data that you guys are collecting today at the perimeter. I'd really like to hear what your thoughts are. I understand what we do with the data today. What should we be doing with all that data? I'll start with Dr. Wetzel because that's your bread and butter.
Delete it. Well, okay, let's be serious. It's costing us millions and millions of dollars to store stuff that we don't look at, right? So if we spend our time knowing what analytics we need as the data's coming in, this is bad, this is good, this is what we need, don't know what this is, let's put this over here, let someone look at it. And the things we already know about, that goes away. That reduces what we collect. That's that noise thing I was talking about, right? So if we get rid of the noise, as in things that we know this is bad, we know this is a state-sponsored actor, we know this is a script kiddie, this is a DDO, we know these things. We don't need to keep and collect those logs and store them anywhere. Oh, by the way, anything I see is my own views. It's not DISA's views. I want to put that. And I don't endorse any product and or service. But the thing is, we need to make sure that the stuff that we know about, get rid of. We know it's bad. We don't care. Bitbucket that. Here's something that's interesting. All right, let's send this to the analytic folks. Let the data scientists figure out what this is. This is good traffic. We know this is stuff we need to go to the post base camp to the end user, get it on. And we do that at each level. So you reduce the noise, get rid of the stuff you know what it is, and then our overall capture of what we keep in our storage facilities gets reduced. That reduces cost, and it also stops the waste of man hours looking at stuff we already know what it is.
I would add on, so piggybacking off of Dr. Wessel, for the data that we don't throw away, what do we do with it? And I think we make it actionable, right? We take that data that we're taking in, and we have other points, as gentlemen brought up, we have JRSS, we have endpoint. How do we take that data and make it actionable down to the layers below us sooner than later, not something that we're talking about in 24, 25. How do we do something sooner? How do we look at what we currently have, right? We do GTI, we do threat intelligence, but there are mechanisms in place to share that information, make it intelligible, and make it actionable to other units that are not perimeter. I don't think we continue to silo the data off and pretend that perimeter is separate than the other environments. We protect all of the Odin, right? And we're all a part of the Odin. How can we make the Odin more secure? So I think, again, how do we make it better? What do we do with the data? We make it actionable.
I want to be a little quantum. I'm going to agree and disagree at the same time a little bit. So agree with the point that we need to thresh out the data that is inherently right off the bat bad. However, when we ingest that data, we start doing the analysis and we start doing the trending, we need to use that trending data to be predictive, right? But sometimes when you get to that data and you analyze it, you need to go back. And so it's recursive. And so you have to be very judicious on what you keep and what you don't keep. And so figuring out what is good, we probably need to have a spectrum, a threshold of what is definitely not good. Maybe we need to look at this. Maybe we just keep the metadata, or no, this is definitely bad. So definitely good, excuse me. So I would say that yes, we need to just be very judicious on what we throw away right away. My perspective, again, personal perspective, is the more data, the more better. Is that the right language? You know, the more data points I have, the more I can see, the more visibility, the more I can trend, the more I can predict. And predicting is how we're going to get ahead of things. Getting that actionable intel, actionable information, the only way we do that is through the trending, through the predictive analysis. Thank you.
So I'm going to disagree with Dr. Wetzel, only because he's wrong. So and because I have the mic right now, and I'm going to talk real fast. So he is correct as far as we need to get rid of the data, but to delete it is the wrong answer. I don't agree with trying to try to filter too much of the data. My perspective is data has a life cycle, and data has related activities, threat activities, and events that go along with the culture of the adversary. It needs to be moved from real time to semi-real time and then over to data mining. So we need a data warehousing approach for the long-term data and have people do the research on what are the techniques that we missed. But get that out of the real-time process, then give the intel back to Cybercom, Joint Forces Headquarters Odin. So Cybercom recently, a meeting I was in, they said that there are things that they found because of the IAP data that we would not have ever found, but they found it, after, so many weeks or whatever. So tying a data mining and a research group with the robustness of the data, trying not to downsize it too much, and having that feedback loop and the staging of the data back to the real-time activities. So I've got myself in trouble again, so I'm done on this one.
Yeah, so for the data, I think that it's a combination. There's some data that you definitely need to keep around, at least for a time period. I don't completely agree with Ernie that we need to keep all the data for a long time. Certainly, I do agree with him that we don't need to keep it close at hand for a long time, but there are some great ways of summarizing and aggregating the data so that you can do the data mining without the large volumes of data that we have today. Today, we are collecting such large volumes of certain types of data that we're not able to ingest other data sources that would be very beneficial if we were to fuse them together. And there's so much of the data that we never even look at or have prepared analytics to highlight problems within the data that would give us insights. And so there's so much of it that we're just not using today. And I think we do need to focus much more on how to better use the data, how to get rid of the data that kind of, as Dr. Wetzel said, that isn't very important and useful, not completely forget about it, but how to summarize it and aggregate it so it can be used to learn from for the future and to validate what we're seeing now against trends from the past. The other thing I would add with some of the data is access to the data. The IAPs, tier 1 sensors, have an enormous amount of data, an enormous amount of visibility, right? That some of the tier 1 defenders have access to that, but there's lots of defenders further down in the network that don't see that, don't have access to that, that probably could benefit from at least partial access and may alleviate some of the data concerns at lower levels where they also try to store all the data and have the same constraints on data storage and analytics. So I think we need to be willing to share some of the data more as well.
So when it comes to email and the amount of data that we get, through these alerts, one of the projects that we're currently working on right now is implementing an orchestration tool to where all of that data, alert data, is correlated, and it helps the security analysts actually, reduce the amount of time that they have to spend in doing this manual, lookup into all these different threat intelligence clouds. So this orchestrator should help reduce the amount of time that they actually spend on going through all the data, so they can focus on actual, actionable efforts like Devon had mentioned earlier. And then with that data, once we determine that, okay, it is something that we could, take action on, that data will now be shared across with the other environments to make sure the same threats that we block on email are now blocked, say, that come through for the web.
So I'm going to fall back here, Ernie. I'm not talking about just deleting things willy-nilly. We've already decided that this is bad. We know what this is. We've already analyzed this 1,000 times across the network, 2,000 times at JFH Odin, another 3,000 times over at Cybercom, and then we did it again at each post base and camp. That's what I'm talking about. So you get rid of that type of stuff first. We'll have that. And as for trends analysis, you already had the metadata to do the trends analysis on it. So I'm not talking about getting rid of the metadata. I'm talking about getting rid of the physical data. And to go back and to rehash those of the known knowns, it really doesn't give you a lot of value. It's when you get the unknowns and with the results of. So you keep the results of, then you could still run your analysis of the results with new raw data, and you could still do your trending. So I think a part of it too is that there's a data science part of this that's being omitted in a big way across the entire entity of the ecosystem, and I kind of know that because there's like three big data scientists that are really up on it. Two of them are over at Cybercom. Colonel Rings is one of them, and then General Stanton is the other. So there's not a lot of us out there who actually can do this type of work, and so you're looking at trying to automate that part. But I do mean be very clear. This is known. Get rid of it, right? But keep the results, and then have those results shared throughout the entire ecosystem. That's also missing. I can't get the access to a shared result till much later in the process.
So I'm gonna cut in here before Devon gets the mic. I think that's a great point from Dr. Wetzel. I have to say that because I'm already in trouble, right? So, but the real point is if you have the known knowns, the feedback loop that we really have, you're talking perimeter right now, but the bigger deal is the data model that defines those known knowns. So that ties back to CyberSA. So perimeter is really not all by itself defending it. It depends on the CyberSA. The feedback for the known knowns to say, this is the new data model, these are the new keys, this is the new relationship, this has to be the way we document, so that as things come in on a regular automated basis, they go straight and they're handled by the data model. So there's very few people who can do this, and very few people can do it quickly.
Yeah, I'm just going to paraphrase from last night. So Mr. Deasy and General Nakasone spoke about this very issue. And I think it kind of falls into two different camps. We have a people issue, you guys are kind of standing up here as well, where there's a conversation that needs to be had, and we need to learn how to share it and what to share, right, and really change that model, right? So there's a cultural issue they talked about yesterday. The second piece is technology. How do we do it, and how do we do it efficiently? I think Dr. West was kind of hitting on the technological approach to it. But those are the two issues. The cultural issue, how do we share, who do we share it with? And we have to understand that this isn't DISA's data, this is, in my opinion, this is Odin data, and really getting that down into the weeds. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Really, that conversation, I think this is where we start at communicating that. The data is very important, everybody cares about it, but just changing that culture that it's not our data, it's all of our data. Right.
Yeah, just to piggyback, just for clarification, I agree that we need to have metadata for store metadata for years at a time. I think that order of magnitude. But like PCAP data, for instance, the metadata is going to get you down to, okay, I need to focus on this area here, but it's the PCAP and the more information, the more granular, detailed information that we're going to have to capture to actually figure out what's going on. Metadata only gets us so far, but I would recommend, suggest that maybe instead of years, we hold the PCAP data for months, a different order of magnitude. So I think PCAP, you can store that, and it's not that much of a cost. It's not that much of a cost prohibitive. The PCAP is going to be an issue, but the farther back that we can go in PCAP, the better our analysts would be. But then also to kind of turn it back to the panel here, one of the questions is how do we get our support from industry? I'd ask, industry, what are your best practices? You can see just from this panel here, we work in the same building. We have varied degrees of what we think are the right practices. We're all right, we're all wrong at the same time, but some of the things that we can lean in industry is what are your best practices? And I imagine that, we have 100 people in this room, we'll have 101 different answers on what the standard is. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sirs. So we have discussed about data modeling and data analytics and why or why not, why should we delete or not delete data. We will now go tangent to that discussion about cloud initiatives. The question that we have here is how do we integrate perimeter defense in the future with cloud initiatives? I would like to start off with Mr. Chudao, please.
Sure. So I mentioned earlier that with some of the cloud changes, we also get new capabilities, like with cloud browsing, where we can push a lot of the browsing functionality out into the cloud, and so that if there is an exploit, it'll be contained out in that environment and should not be able to make its way further down into the DOTA itself. But as alluded to earlier, transitioning things to the cloud also presents a number of other challenges for perimeter security, in that in some cases, the access to the cloud, the data flows, may not be transiting the normal perimeter points, that the IAPs. So we may not be able to see that. So the question then is, how do we get insight into what's happening in that cloud environment? Are there bad things happening there? And can it go from those environments into DOTA proper? And a lot of that is established based on what the cloud services are, what the model is. More of the sensitive services do have to go through the traditional IAP perimeter stack, so that way we can get visibility and take action on those threats that are trying to get to our sensitive data.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else care to join in?
Yes, so the first thing to remember about cloud, and I was talking to one of our NSA reps on it, I thought it was really good. He said, cloud activity, cloud storage has no guarantee that it will be contiguous. So you think about a data center right now, and you're thinking about a physical data center. It gives you a service, gives you a capability, gives you data, whatever it may be. You know, it could be your business applications. So that sounds good, but now if we contract this out in the cloud for efficiency, there's no guarantee that your complete transaction is going to be in one contiguous location, right? Either storage-wise inside memory or storage-wise inside or activity inside one data center. Our concern there would be, well, what if it's sent overseas? There are different other cross-domain and or cryptological issues with dealing with overseas locations because they have to sign agreements. So not as easy as you thought it was now, is it? So you just think, well, we just push it off to the cloud. Well, is it the cloud, or did they buy efficiency? Did they have a cloud, a mist, and a fog for computing? Are they computing you at sublayers and then aggregating this stuff up to handle it? Because they have to be efficient. So the big thing will be SLAs. What's the service level agreement? And then how much visibility does DoD want inside that data? Because it could be all over the place just to make sure we can get some efficiencies for our dollar.
So I would say two ways that we need to integrate with the cloud. First one being, and I'll hash that back, sharing information, treating the cloud point like it is a perimeter, let's just say endpoint out there. It needs to be intelligence. So sharing that intelligence that we receive from perimeter down to the cloud. A second piece is really looking at the other services that we provide in perimeter and being able to deploy those services into the cloud initiatives, be that DDoS protection, DNS protection, as well as the way that we automate functions, right? So taking the services that we offer today out of perimeter and seeing how we can deploy those services to protect workloads in cloud will be, a major initiative for us.
Colonel?
I think from a warfighter perspective, I think the first decision we have to make is we've heard it from the panel, do we actually own the data? Is the data ours? Is that part of the service levels or agreement to make sure that they provide a certain minimum level of security? But if we agree that we own the data, then we need to have visibility of the data 100% of the time, right? And that means sensors. That means access. Does that mean virtual access or physical access? I don't know, but I think there's some combat commanders out there that would say that, hey, I need to actually deploy a sensor into my area. And if you think about it like a self-storage container, self-storage garage, right? You have access to your belongings in that garage, right? You create a service level agreement with that vendor to have access during normal duty hours when the gates are open, and when, at night there's also other mechanisms, control mechanisms, keys, passwords, and stuff like that, that you have unfettered access. We need to have the same thing. We need to have 100% visibility and 100% access as much as we can. We need to use those service level agreements to maximize our maneuver so that we have positive C2. If you don't have access and you don't have visibility, you don't have positive C2. If you don't have positive C2, you don't have security. Thank you.
So I'm going to follow up on just one key point, service level agreements. That's going to be probably key for us to have successful cloud migrations and to have an understanding what we're allowed to do and not do and what happens when we store our data off-prem. If I'm using Fred, I'm just giving that as a name as a cloud provider, Fred. So Fred, the cloud provider, we have a service level agreement. I have times I can get to my data. However, Fred decides it's cheaper to store my data in somewhere in Europe. That makes it harder because of how we were able to exploit certain types of encryptions. So part of the cloud's strategy as we go forward, in my opinion, is that each program needs to understand what they're signing up for, not just let someone else handle it for them. So if you're a PM and you're signing up for a cloud because that seems to be the driving function, or that's what we should be doing, you need to understand how SLAs work and work with general counsel to get the SLA that fits what you're trying to do within your constraints and restraints of your organization in your program.
That just spawned a neuron real quick. So if you think about it, right, we treat commodities, we assign certain value to just different material things, right? Data should be treated the same way. So if you have data that is essential to your warfighting mission, maybe you shouldn't think about putting it on the cloud. Maybe you should keep it closer at home, right? Your crown jewels, you keep at home, you keep closer, you put it in a safe deposit box. There's a certain level of extra security that you could do above and beyond for that critical information you need access. You need to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the information. Some of the other things, like my Netflix account, I can put that in the cloud all the time. I have ubiquity, I have access to it all the time, but if somebody compromises it, that's okay. I'm just not going to watch Terminator that day, right? So I think for data, we should look at, okay, there are different types of data, different, we should assign different values to different kinds of data. I think that's probably a way ahead. Thank you.
Mr. Duncan Carter? Yes, sir.
Yes. So I was just going to say, I think this is, at least from my perspective, this is where I think we need help from the industry, as far as how we actually integrate, our enterprise security policies that we currently have behind the perimeter. And when those applications and data actually move out into the cloud environments, you kind of create somewhat of a security gap because you don't have that, you don't have the same enterprise security policies being standardized across the board. So, if we could get help, kind of figuring out, okay, what are the standard practices? Is there some type of hybrid security model that we could actually implement to where we can push our security policies, across to all these different, type of environments?
And I would also just add briefly to that in addition to the different security policies that, industry should help us with, but also there was a lot of mention of the SLAs and what are those agreements, but we don't necessarily get visibility into what's happening in those different cloud environments to ensure that those SLAs are being adhered to, right? And so I think there's also a good conversation for what is the ongoing, monitoring and data and auditing that we can get from those cloud environments to ensure that, what we're expecting to happen is actually happening in those environments.
I'm just going to wrap up with two things. We need to be honest that even though we're at the perimeter, there's traffic, there are cloud traffic that's going over our space. So how do we secure those workloads? I think Duncan's getting after that mission. The second one is to ensure that we don't lose focus, that we do see cloud as something that, in my opinion, is external and securing that workload properly. So it's again, being honest that, hey, traffic is happening. How do we secure that workload? And then number two, making sure that we operate as one so that we don't operate as a silo.
Thank you very much, sirs. We are now down to the last 10 minutes of our given hour. At this point, I would still like to invite anybody from the audience to come forward and ask their questions if they have any. Yes, sir. Please.
Thanks, gentlemen. Chris Medina with Proofpoint. And a couple of great observations, I think, from Dr. Wetzel's perspective and from Mr. Hibbs' perspective. Worked with some of you before. So many places I could go with this. So in terms of using or utilizing the cloud, I see a lot of industry best practice in terms of tag and release. So in other words, you see all this data that's happening. If it's unknown inbound and it's known to us via hashtag or some type of known perspective, tag it and release it for mutations like, say, the WannaCry or something else like that, so you can observe it from that perspective. There's also the ability, and I argue with Mr. Hibbs on the ability for visibility. Depending on those SLAs, you can have all that visibility, still tag and release, and keep the cost of maintaining that data down. What is the panel's opinion on being able to do that with also Duncan Carter's great point on orchestration on the back end, just in case you get something that's unknown and has penetrated?
Take the first.
I've actually done this.
So I'll jump into this because I'm not really sure of the question, so I'm the hitman for today. So you were asking about the potential of an unknown and how complex would keeping an SLA be, kind of?
Sort of. So it goes with the argument that you're having with Dr. Wetzel in terms of, hey, why would we want to maintain this data if we don't care about this data? If it's unknown inbound,
Right.
number one, we
What Ernie can say.
go
You
through
have
an
to.
immense amount of security controls to maintain that data, right? And then the kernel also suggested that, hey, the more data we keep, the better the understanding of that. But there's got to be a midline between, what's right, and then also the budgetary purpose of that, and being able to sift through it. What does the panel consider a reasonable answer towards how much data that they get? What is considered, reasonable to collect if it's unknown inbound?
I think you. So if you go back on my statement, which is always an error because I'm human, right? If you think about all the data, and if you have a way to assign metadata to a good portion of it, and now it's the unknown, unassigned metadata that you really don't have any activity on. It's just sitting there, and it's basically getting obsolescent as it sits there. So at what point, after you've analyzed it, 6 months from data mining, it depends on how much brain work you're putting into this, because everybody's moving forward. So if you took a signature approach, then you said, okay, I can when I roll signatures back in, they may come back into play. Some old signatures may come back into play. But then if I'm looking at the activities and the signatures, so I'm trying to give you a more than one-dimensional answer to this. It's instead of just a set of data based on a metadata model based on certain known activities, if you connect those together and say, so in many ways, if you kind of look at RMF, I know that RMF kind of turns people off, but if you're thinking about an impact level, and if you said this data coming through it looks kind of like it's stagnant, doesn't look like it's going to be kicked in, doesn't look like it's a sleeper set of data, then I would think an impact level approach to saying, okay, how bad could this be? How many things could it tie to? But that's on the analytical side. So I think after you say the potential connections it could have, then you say, all right, it's good to drop.
But I'm sorry, but how would you know that, right? If it's unknown inbound, what we're saying is,
Let me do this.
do we just discard it because we already know certain things about it, or do we tag it, which then becomes your data for access and access control?
Right.
Right?
I think we need some AI and ML on this, right? So it's not going to be, it can't be onesie-twosies.
So I designed and built a system for our folks over at the Cybercom here recently called an intelligent data lake. And it actually, as data is ingested, it tagged the data for you based on a set of parameters. Then based on those set of parameters, your data models that you generated could automatically be applied. And then you use your ML to be able to, okay, this is what we know is good. And then we tested it with 1.2 million records. So, don't quote me, it was over 1 million records. And we're able to go through that fairly quickly, right? So there's ways to do this, but you have to do real data science first to know what your models look like to then apply them. It's not magic, you tag everything and things happen. You have to know what you're tagging, when you're tagging, why you're tagging. You have to know what questions that you're asking. And then when you get to the unknowns, that's why I keep saying reduce the noise. Because once you reduce the noise, what's left is your unknowns. And then that's when you sit down and start doing real hardcore data science. It's when you bring in academics, that's when you bring in industry to solve the very complex of those problem sets. The first 3 layers of these problems are solved and solvable by other folks. We can copy and paste that and put that into our environment now. It's that last bit that really is going to take a diversified set of knowledges, a diversified set of technologies, and a diversified set of thoughts.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wetzel.
I would just add in.
Yes, we have our last 2 minutes. I'll invite the panelists for any closing remarks. Sir.
Yeah, I would just add in to finish that off, and then I'll add in my closing statement too. So, again, I think we have a people conversation first. I think we have to understand the people element, right? What's the problem we're trying to solve, and how do we do that? And then we inject the technology to that. So again, and you probably saw up here, there's no true solid answer to how we deal with data yet, right? But I think once we take that people element, have a conversation, understand the problem that we're trying to solve, then we can take it down to intelligible chunks, right? Little small pieces that we can actually solve. I don't feel that we're quite there yet, right? But I'll add in this to my final piece that again, what do we need from industry? We need to be able to integrate. We need to be able to inject. We need to be able to send data that we have at perimeter to other ends and make it intelligible, right? We're not going to get out of having enough people. We don't have enough people, and that won't be solved today or tomorrow. But taking that technology, taking the intel that we have today, and making it intelligible down to the endpoints, the cloud, and JRSS is where we need to go.
For closing, I think what I hope that you all can take from this is that what we need from industry is help with the homogeneity. Right, we have a whole bunch of different products and services. We would like to get to homogeneity, but that's aspirational and probably not in the realm of the reasonable. Right, so until we get to homogeneous networks and services, we probably need something that helps us with interoperability, a security fabric where we can take different devices from different vendors. We need to be, as the government, need to be vendor agnostic, right? But we need to have very specific functions and capabilities. If we can have the vendors out there develop functions and capabilities that plug and play into these different functional areas, that would help us out tremendously. Thank you.
Thank you, sirs. With that said, I have 3 announcements before everybody stands up. We have DISA look books available to the right of the table. Please feel free to come and pick up a book. Also, for folks who would require or need continuing education credits, we have Bob. He's raising his hand in the back. You can scan and have your credits available. And last but not least, thank you so much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. In behalf of our panelists, everybody have a nice AFCEA day. Thank you.
All the answers.
All right.
That was good.